Hey, my peeps, geeks, and fellow freaks. Welcome to Mistress Grey Chats, where I chat about whatever I want. How have you guys been doing? Me, I've been surviving. Okay, so I have this Tumblr called Mistress Grey Posts. Shocking, I know, right? Well, on it, I've noticed some criticism of Uncle Iroh, aka the best uncle ever. Though I suppose Uncle Phil could potentially fight him for that title, but let's focus on the topic at hand. And I think it's pretty fair for us to be critical of Uncle Iroh. I mean, yes, he's the father figure we all wanted when we were kids. But as we grow up, it's inevitable for us to realize that the adult figures in our life were not perfect, even the fictional ones. Especially the ones from shows as nuanced as Avatar: The Last Airbender. Some of this criticism stems from claiming that Uncle Iroh was a war criminal. Or, boiling it down, a lot of it seems to be feeling like Iroh was too easily forgiven for the crimes he did commit, or that he was left off too easily. And I wanted to explore that a bit. But none of this is me telling people what characters they should like, or how they should interpret media, or how to apply forgiveness to people in their actual lives. This is just a reflection of my thoughts and ideas. Though, fair warning, before we get too deep into this video, we are going to be talking about war crimes a little bit. Like, not too deep or for too long, but since war crimes are naturally dark stuff, I just figured to give you guys a heads up in case anybody is particularly sensitive about that stuff. We good? We good. Great. Let's get started with this. Okay, let's look at the first claim and see if Iroh is indeed a war criminal. Now, since as far as I know, we are not aware of the rules of war of the Avatar world, I'll be using the Geneva Conventions to decide if Iroh is indeed a war criminal or not. Okay, let's take a look. On second thought, since it's about 224 pages long, I think I'll just skim this and use the Wikipedia page instead to decide if Iroh is indeed a war criminal or not. Alright, I'll check this out and then get back to you guys.
1 hour later.
There is much we don't know about Iroh's military history, beyond the fact that he was considered a war hero in the Fire Nation, which isn't doing him any favors with the Fire Nation's imperialistic history and goals. And so there are many war crimes we can't be certain of if they happened or not, such as pillaging, raping, misuse of a truce flag, use of child soldiers, and so on. However, I do think that there are some war crimes that can apply to Iroh, as we know that he did indeed commit the 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se. The first is willful killing or causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health. The second is directing attacks against civilians. The third is starvation. A siege, by its very nature, requires cutting off resources like food to a city, which I'd personally count as willfully and directly harming civilians through starvation and a lack of other necessary supplies. Now, Ba Sing Se as a city has its farms located within its walls, so the Fire Nation didn't have the opportunity to fully restrict the food supply of the city, but they were clearly willing to do so and did restrict supplies coming into the city. Considering this, along with the fact that this was not Iroh's first command and that he was making light of war, leads me to believe that General Iroh probably did indeed commit war crimes. Now that's an uncomfortable thought, isn't it? A character many of us loved unquestionably as a child probably would be classified as war criminal. And I'm sure many of you who watched Avatar as children like me didn't fully understand the horrors of war. But going back, I can't help but be struck by it. Take the one scene where Iroh sends a letter to the Fire Nation royal family from the war front.
Ba Sing Se must be something to behold. I hope you all may see it someday. If we don't burn it to the ground first.
In it, he makes a joke about burning a city full of people down to the ground. And he laughs. And so does the Fire Nation royal family. And I think growing up and realizing just how disturbing and horrifying war is, and coming to realize that Iroh happily took part in this. Even if he didn't necessarily go out of his way to murder people, he did participate and didn't see anything wrong. So I think it's perfectly understandable for people to have mixed feelings. However, I do think there's a bit more to these mixed feelings than is on the surface level, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. I think some of this controversy, if you can call it that, comes from Azula stans trying to find a scapegoat for her. I'll talk a little bit more about Azula later, but for now I'll just say that she is indeed a fascinating character who I believe deserves sympathy, being a teenager raised in a toxic environment, but we can't pin the failings of her, the failings of her father, and the failings of her country on Iroh alone. The second reason I think this bothers people is that fandoms, and perhaps some of greater society, have developed certain ideas about forgiveness, redemption, and atonement. MelinaPendulum, aka Princess Weeks, has done several great videos talking about redemption in fiction and fandom, and I really enjoyed them. I'll probably also be influenced by them. So I'll leave some links in the description to those videos below. Notice me, senpai, please. Okay, back to the topic at hand. Something Princess Weeks brought up that I want to talk about is how in fandom we tend to define redemption like atonement. Redemption traditionally meant to be saved or rescued, while atonement meant to satisfy or repair wrongdoing. This, I think, has caused some minor confusion with characters who have been traditionally referred to as redeemed, like Darth Vader, but I think more importantly it shows how many of our concepts of redemption for characters are rooted, to borrow a term from Princess Weeks, in pop Christianity. Take the angel-devil dichotomy, where you are either purely good or purely evil. In a lot of American media, we have stories where an evil or wrong person or entity is dehumanized and needs to be destroyed. These people or beings are incapable of good and never given the opportunity to act in better ways, such as the White Witch, Maleficent, or Lucifer himself. We also have many stories where our heroes are told that they can't kill or do a certain act because it will make them just like the villains. Never mind that the villains have committed mass murder and the hero is just trying to stop them. Take how in some of the English dubs of Dragon Ball Z, we have Goku telling Krillin not to kill Vegeta.
Don't do it. I know it's justice. It's not right. If you strike him down, will only show that better than he is. It means that they've won. No matter what. Be strong.
And now let's compare this to the Japanese version a little bit. With such a heavy emphasis on these ideas, I feel like a lot of people grew up rejecting or resenting the mentality of you must always forgive, or that if you kill the bad guy, you are just as bad as them. Because on the practical level, it's just not true. And on the emotional level, this made a lot of people feel like they had to forgive or accept their abusers, which is not a message most people take kindly to. And it also helped create what I feel is this weird cocktail of ideas, because even though many people grew to resent the whole "you're just as bad as the villain" trope, I still think it's important to acknowledge that they were exposed to this idea of purity, where if you don't do something perfectly good, or where if you do something bad, you're just as evil as the villain. And as we established in much of American media, evil needs to be destroyed. So when people come to realize that Iroh used to do cruel things and in many ways was a bad person, they internalize it to mean that Iroh is still a bad person and is incapable of being better, and therefore must be destroyed, or in this case with fandom, cancelled and not thought of as a good character. But I don't think this is a good mindset, as in real life I feel like it encourages us to write people off and gives people justification for not even trying to change. After all, if it's impossible, why would they try? But in Iroh, we see this mentality rejected. Take this scene.
So you've been there before?
Once, when I was a different man.
I've done some things in my past that I'm not proud of. But that's why I'm going to Ba Sing Se. For a new beginning. A second chance.
That's very noble of you. I believe people can change their lives if they want to. I believe in second chances.
While Iroh might be looking at Zuko in this scene, I do believe he's also speaking of himself. I believe that Iroh has to believe that people can change for the better, because otherwise he's still the same man who killed people. Otherwise, he's still the same man who forwarded an imperialistic goal that killed his son and the sons of many other people. That's a brutal burden to bear, even if it was one of Iroh's own making.
Leaves from the vine, falling so slow.
And this belief in change also plays out in how he treats Zuko. He gives Zuko sympathy and kindness, but also pushes Zuko to do better.
Is it your own destiny, or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you? I'm begging you, Prince Zuko. It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
Iroh's belief that he can change and that others can change in turn encourages that change. And personally, I find that to be a beautiful message. However, people are still critical of the messenger. Many feel like Iroh should have done more, such as he should have challenged Ozai for the throne. He should have actively turned against the Fire Nation sooner. He should have been more kind to Azula. I get why people feel this way, as Iroh, being Fire Nation royalty and a general and first in line to the throne, he had a lot of power. But that doesn't mean he had the power to single-handedly change the world. Towards the end of this series, we see Iroh admit that he might not be able to take Ozai in a physical fight. And by the time Iroh returned from his military exploits after the death of his son, Ozai had already gained a lot of political power, enough political power to become the Fire Lord despite his father's wishes. And we don't fully know what opportunities Iroh had to oppose the Fire Nation, what he did or didn't do. While he was a general, as far as we know, he didn't have an army that was specifically loyal to him by the time he returned. So it's not like Iroh could just take over the kingdom by force. I suppose he could have defected to the Earth Kingdom, but that wouldn't have guaranteed anything considering how fractured the Earth Kingdom was, and how he would need them to trust them rather than kill him on sight. Even more importantly, if he defected to the Earth Kingdom, he would be abandoning Zuko and Azula unless he kidnapped them, which I don't think would have worked, but who knows. In theory, defecting to help stop the war should have been more important than his family, but I believe a lot of us would find it hard to put that theory into practice. I also suppose Iroh could have been more direct with Zuko about how evil Ozai was, but you gotta remember, abuse victims rarely are convinced by direct confrontation. And Iroh could have dealt with Azula better, but A, he couldn't be in two places at once, so it made sense for him to go with a child that was away from Ozai and was more likely to accept his help. B, Azula tried to kill him. C, regardless of what Iroh did or didn't do, Ozai was grooming Azula to be a war criminal. And without the war ending, she most certainly would have become one, if she wasn't one already. I'm sure there's more that Iroh could have done, as in real life there's often more people could have done, but no one could do everything. Another reason people may feel resentment towards Iroh is that they feel by saying Iroh is now a good person or treating him as a good person means ignoring or minimizing his past wrongdoings. I am sympathetic to this mentality, as there are so many stories that try to justify a character being a good guy or on the side of the good guys by ignoring the evil they have done in their past, such as how Once Upon a Time kept forgetting that Regina raped Graham, or the many other atrocities she committed. But I also find this mentality particularly complicated. I could easily turn around and say that by treating Iroh as a bad person, it's ignoring or minimizing the good he's done. But that feels like a bit of a cheap shot. I do believe that the things we have done in the past inform who we are now, and that the effects of our choices don't just disappear. But I don't like trying to quantify the good and bad a person has done, because I'm not sure one necessarily counteracts the other. And life is also complicated. I'm not yet a god who sees all and can perfectly judge if a person's life is a bad one or a good one, or if they're a bad person or a good person. I'm just a person that feels like we can acknowledge that people can do wrong without ignoring the good they have also done. And I think the show kind of backs me up on this concept too, even if it's never super direct with it. Take how Iroh never denies the wrong he's done, and neither do any other characters. Like the Earthbenders who capture Iroh and have a clear disdain for him, they are not shown negatively for this disdain, even as they act as antagonists to Zuko and Iroh. Or take the show's finale. By this time, both the audience and Zuko clearly think of his uncle as a good person, but at the same time, Iroh acknowledges his past wrongdoings and feels the need to right it.
The Fire Lord. When I was a boy, I had a vision that I would one day take Ba Sing Se. Only now do I see that my destiny is to take it back from the Fire Nation, so the Earth Kingdom can be free again.
And to backtrack a little bit, in an earlier episode, Zuko even acknowledges how complicated his uncle can be.
The last great dragon was conquered long before I was born. By my uncle.
But I thought your uncle was, I don't know, good?
He had a complicated past. A family tradition, I guess.
Though I will admit that the show could have been more direct in this message. And it could have also done more to show just how bad Iroh was. and how much harm his actions did. They could have easily had a character who lost someone in the siege of Ba Sing Se, especially since they spent a lot of time in that city. But instead, the show just showed generic suffering from the Fire Nation's imperialism rather than anything directly caused by Iroh's military actions. I think Iroh's favorite son, Zuko, is also partially to blame for some of this resentment towards Iroh. For better and for worse, Zuko has shaped how we feel about redemption arcs and the characters that are redeemed. When people talk about why Zuko's redemption arc worked, they often bring up three things. The first is that Zuko wasn't the worst person. The second is that he suffered consequences for his actions. And the third is that he tried to make amends. Now, let's look at this first reason. In media as a whole, Zuko is far from the worst villain. He doesn't blow up planets like Frieza or emotionally manipulate people like Mother Gothel. Even on the show, Zuko is not the worst. We have characters like Admiral Zhao, who nearly throws the natural order out of balance just for glory. Iroh, though, was almost one of the worst, because he committed war crimes and forwarded an imperialistic goal. The only thing that saves him from being the worst is that he loved his children, unlike Ozai. And I suppose this might make it a little hard for people to take Iroh's talk of change seriously, especially since, as far as I know, we don't really have anyone comparable to Iroh in recorded history. There are generals who change sides, but they are often regarded as traitors who did so for money rather than realizing that the side they originally fought for was in the wrong. Probably because A, money talks, and B, it wouldn't be great for morale if you straight up said your general left because you were on the wrong side. Though we definitely have examples of terrible people who did better, such as Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a Confederate general who massacred a lot of black people and was the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. However, he later left the Klan and advocated for racial harmony. Or John Rabe, who was a Nazi that defended people during the Nanking Massacre. I will not call these men good people because, like I said, I am not a god who can weigh the lives of mortals. I do not know all the details of their lives, nor do I know them personally, as they are very dead. And I also wasn't a part of any of the groups these people targeted. But these men do show that people who were terrible have the capacity to change and be better. However, for many people, seeing terrible people do better isn't satisfying because we want evil to be cast out, or we want to see people suffer for their mistakes, especially when these mistakes harmed us. Which brings us to the second reason people often bring up for liking Zuko's redemption: his suffering. Okay, that's not totally accurate. We as an audience can enjoy Zuko's suffering for the drama of it, but the reason many people give for liking his redemption is that Zuko faced consequences for his actions. In the show, much of Iroh's suffering and change happened before the show started, so it could feel like Iroh got off more easily than Zuko, who is guilty of much less. But it is telling that even after so much time has passed since Iroh changed, that he still suffers. We see this in the show in how he mourns the death of his son. Yes, he's moved on with his life and found joy, but he will never fully get over this loss. It might be arguable that it's a lesser pain than what his victims experienced, but it's still an internal pain. And I'm not sure what more he should have suffered. I suppose he could have been arrested and put on trial after freeing Ba Sing Se, but at that point, Iroh had proven he could do a lot more good for people outside of jail than in it. He could have been made to physically suffer or lose more family members, such as his victims, but it would not have undone the pain he caused. It might have been cathartic for his victims, but it would have been little more. I'm not trying to negate the importance of closure and catharsis for victims, but their needs don't necessarily outweigh the needs of those Iroh still has the potential to help in the future. It is also worth noting that Zuko and Iroh's suffering is a bit different. Zuko did indeed suffer the consequences of his actions, and this suffering gave him reason to change, but the true catalyst for his change was both realizing the harm the Fire Nation was doing and realizing how empty his own goals were. While Iroh's suffering at the loss of his son is heavily implied to be what prompted his change. This has led some people to dismiss Iroh's change and suffering by saying he only changed because he lost his son. This makes it sound like Iroh didn't suffer properly or for the right reasons, which to me is an uncomfortable idea. Because losing a family member is a great cause of suffering for many people. Even if it was a different loss Iroh suffered, I don't like the idea of not suffering enough, because suffering is not really something one can make an objective judgment on. I mean, yes, if one person gets a splinter and another has cancer, it is clearly not the same level of suffering. But if one person loses an arm and another loses a child, you would be a terrible person for comparing their suffering. And most of the time in life, it's not clear-cut as who is suffering the most, especially when for what is light for one person is hard for another. And the second reason I don't like this is because of the implication that Iroh should have automatically known the Fire Nation's cause was wrong and shouldn't have needed his son to die to change. By the same logic, Zuko shouldn't have needed to see the suffering of the Earth Kingdom to know that the Fire Nation was doing wrong by creating a war. Even while I do agree that people should know not to be cruel to each other, it's also worth acknowledging that people don't automatically know things. People learn from their environments, and the results they get from their actions is what helps teach them. Iroh was born into an environment where these horrible war crimes were celebrated. While I don't want to justify imperialism or any other cruel actions by just saying, oh, you were just born in a bad environment, I do want to acknowledge how hard it is to break out of those structures when you've never known anything different and never been given a reason to question it. Lastly, on this topic of suffering, I don't like how we so often want people or characters to suffer for their actions. Yes, people should face consequences, but why do those consequences so often have to be suffering? Suffering can cause growth, but it can also do more harm than what was originally there. And if harm has already been done, what good will more harm do? I'd rather encourage trying to heal, righting wrongs when possible, and people committing to making steps to be better people than just punishment for punishment's sake. I get the need for catharsis, or seeing those who hurt you also hurt. And there are people who I do wish would be punished, or those whom I have lashed out at. I just don't think those instincts always help, and it's worth us considering that. Now let's move on to the third reason people give for liking Zuko's redemption arc. Zuko actively tries to make amends. Iroh does make tangible amends by freeing Ba Sing Se in the finale. However, again, compared with Zuko, we see a lot less of it. We have several episodes of Zuko bonding with the game and helping them personally, such as when Zuko helped Sokka save his father, or with how he taught Aang firebending so he could help take out his father Ozai. So to a viewer, it might feel like Iroh has done less, but that's for a good reason. It's not Iroh's story. We shouldn't need to see every detail of a character's life to make judgments on them. In Iroh's case, we shouldn't need to see all the work that went into planning the final battle at Ba Sing Se to know that it must have taken a lot of work to organize. Though it is worth noting that freeing a city in one day in a decisive battle does not necessarily equate to a 600-day siege. But it's not a small thing either. I don't think there's anything Iroh could actually truly do to make up for what he has done? Because, in my mind, the worth of one life is worth more than all the riches in the world. And killing someone directly or indirectly cannot be undone even by saving the lives of many more people. What matters is that Iroh did what he could do to undo the harm he has done. Zuko's redemption arc is great for many reasons, but it can't necessarily be applied to all characters, nor should it be. Iroh was an imperialist general who was open to the greatest change when he was brought down to his lowest point. We are not privy to much of his journey, but I don't think that's the point of Iroh's character. I think his point was his destination. Iroh shows that you can be terrible, but still be capable of love and humanity, and it is because of that you can change. When you demand that change in yourself, you can help cultivate it in the world and in others around you. You don't have to like or forgive Iroh for his actions. No person or fictional character is owed forgiveness, and considering how the citizens of the Earth Kingdom reacted to Zuko, who they knew was banished, I don't think they would forgive Iroh, even after freeing Ba Sing Se. But Iroh doesn't need their forgiveness to be a better person. We so often talk in fandom about redemption arcs, and if a character deserves them or not. But in real life, people deserve to be better people by being better people. Iroh was a person who did great harm, but he was not cast out, cursed to never change. Iroh chose to become better. He may have never become perfect, but he did become wise and compassionate. So, let's take some lessons from Iroh's story by choosing to be better people, no matter how terrible we have been. By encouraging those we can to change, and to accept that people can change, even if we never forgive them for what they've done to us.
Leaves from the vine, falling so slow, like fragile tiny shells, drifting in the foam. Little so come on.
Well, that was long. You guys would not believe all the stuff I had to cut out. I had this whole thing on how great redemptions are and how they can help build empathy, but it was way too off topic. Though before we go, I do want to say that Avatar as a franchise is great at letting characters have their own relationship with forgiveness and whether or not they choose to forgive those that hurt them. Okay guys, thanks for watching. Do all the clickety-click things, and tell me how you feel about Iroh being a war criminal, or just tell me your favorite redeemed character. And all Ozai lovers will have their face burned in an Agni Kai. Just kidding. Bye for real now. Have a nice and safe rest of your day. I hope you all have a great day.